after spending 16 years on death row, Kevin Ray Underwood was executed by lethal injection. But what did he do to end up strapped to a gurney? Due to the nature of this case, viewer discretion is advised. All descriptions are factual and handled with care. Lately, Kevin had been consumed by a dark, obsessive fantasy, one that went far beyond violent thoughts. He wanted to abduct someone, assault them, kill them, eat their flesh, and then make the body disappear. And in his mind, Jamie Rose Bolin was the perfect target. In 2006, Jamie was splitting her time between two homes. Her parents had separated a couple years earlier, and she was living under a shared custody agreement. That spring, she was staying with her dad, Curtis Bolan, a hard-working auto mechanic in Purcell, Oklahoma, a quiet town just south of Oklahoma City. But while life moved on for Jamie, Kevin Underwood had already started slipping deeper into his own world. 2 years earlier, in 2004, he started thinking about killing. And he wasn't just fantasizing, he was writing it all down. On his computer, Kevin documented everything. He wrote in disturbing detail about abducting someone, torturing them, stabbing needles into their eyes, and chopping up the body like a butcher in a meat shop. He described cooking the remains, eating the flesh, and finding ways to get rid of what was left: bones, organs, everything. And for a while, those sick thoughts stayed on the screen. But eventually, he decided to make it real. In both his private writings and later police confessions, Kevin made one thing terrifyingly clear. He wanted as much of it to happen while his victim was still alive. And in 2006, he picked her, Jamie. It wasn't some random impulse. He had been planning it for months. In his mind, he had already played it out, how he would lure her in, what he would do once she was inside, and how it would all end. During those months, he worked hard to make himself look harmless. Just a nice, friendly face in the hallway. The kind of neighbor who waved hello and didn't draw attention. And it worked, especially on kids. One afternoon, he stood outside his doorway holding his pet rat. Jamie, just 10 years old with a love for animals, stopped when she saw it and asked if she could pet it. And Kevin smiled and said yes. From there, it became a routine. Sometimes his door was wide open and he would be sitting in the living room with the rat nearby. Jamie would step in, chat, and laugh at the rat's little movements. Kevin made her feel welcome, safe even. He would switch on SpongeBob, her favorite, and she would settle in for a while before heading back home. She started stopping by more often, staying a little longer each time. But Kevin had a plan, a dark one, and Jamie had no idea. He had already chosen her. She was the one he had been waiting for, and all he needed was the right moment. And on April 12, 2006, he decided that moment had come. Jamie went to school like always, but planned to stop by the library afterward. First, though, she came home to change clothes. Kevin had been hoping to grab her before she ever walked through her front door to make it look like she had vanished on her way home from school. But he missed his chance. And now, with her outfit changed, anyone would know she had been home. Still, he didn't care. He had waited long enough, and he was going to move forward anyway. As she passed by his door again, Jamie asked if she could come in and pet the rat. Kevin said yes. She stepped inside, knelt down beside the animal, and reached out. But while she focused on the rat, he crept behind her. Then he grabbed a heavy wooden cutting board and brought it down on her head. Hard, hoping to knock her unconscious. But Jamie didn't go quiet. She screamed, and the sound tore through the room, so he hit her again and again. Through her broken sobs, she began repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." A terrified plea from someone who didn't understand what she had done wrong. She tried to run, panicked and disoriented, but Kevin lunged, tackled her to the floor, and pinned her down. Then he sat on her chest and pressed his hand over her face, holding it there until it was over. But that wasn't quick. Kevin later told investigators it took 15 to 20 minutes before Jamie finally stopped moving. Afterward, he stepped outside and brought Jamie's bicycle in from where she had left it. But as he looked at it, something clicked. The bike, he realized, would be harder to get rid of than her body. So he took it apart piece by piece and shoved it under his bed. That could wait. Kevin was frustrated, disappointed even. The plan he had carefully built in his mind was already falling apart. Jamie had died too soon before he could do everything he had imagined. But that didn't stop him. Even though she was no longer alive, he went ahead anyway. He acted out the rest of his fantasy anyway, just the way he had pictured it. He tried to violate her body, but couldn't perform. Frustrated again, he dragged her into the bathroom and tried to cut off her head with a knife. But that didn't work either. He later told investigators he had wanted to set it on a desk so it could, like, watch me. He also had planned to sleep next to her corpse for a day or two, then eventually cook and eat parts of it. But things turned out a little different than planned. In the end, he wrapped Jamie in plastic sheeting, placed her into a large plastic storage tub, sealed it shut, and hid it inside his closet. Meanwhile, Jamie's father, Curtis Bolan, had come home and noticed she was missing. He didn't hesitate and called the police right away. And the search kicked off quickly. Officers, firefighters, and dozens of neighbors combed out the area, checking ditches, fields, and parking lots. And when there was still no sign of her the next day, the FBI got involved, sending more than 24 agents to help. Then a neighbor came forward. She had seen Jamie with a young man from the same apartment complex, but no one knew who he was. By April 14th, 2 days after Jamie vanished, police had set up roadblocks near her apartment complex, stopping cars and questioning drivers in hopes of getting a lead. At one of those checkpoints, FBI agent Craig Overby pulled over a truck. Behind the wheel was Kevin's father, and sitting quietly in the passenger seat was Kevin himself. Kevin's father mentioned that they had heard about the missing girl, and then casually added that Kevin actually lived right next door to her. That detail immediately caught Craig's attention. He asked Kevin if he would be willing to step into the patrol car for a quick conversation. Kevin agreed, but once the door shut, the things he said began raising serious red flags. When Craig asked if Kevin had seen Jamie that Wednesday afternoon after school, Kevin said he had, briefly, as she rode away from the apartment complex on her bike, and that made him possibly the last known person to see her alive. So officers asked him to come down to the station for a formal interview, and Kevin agreed again. But the red flags kept coming. Everyone else who had seen Jamie that day described the same outfit, the one she wore to school. But Kevin gave a completely different description. Stranger still, he claimed to have only glanced at her as she rode off, yet somehow he could recall in perfect detail exactly what she had on, from head to toe. After the interview was over, the FBI agents offered to drive Kevin home, but once they arrived at the apartment complex, they asked if they could search his apartment, and Kevin said yes. He feared that it would be suspicious not to let them in, and he just hoped they wouldn't find what he had hidden. By 5 p.m., they were inside his small, messy unit, and in the closet they found a large plastic storage tub with its lid sealed tight with duct tape. Kevin claimed it was filled with comic books and that the tape was to keep moisture out. But when Craig peeled back a strip and cracked the lid open, he stopped cold. Inside, just beneath the surface, was a small shirt, exactly like the one Kevin had described Jamie wearing the day she vanished. Craig didn't see any comics, and when he mentioned that out loud, Kevin didn't hesitate. "Go ahead and arrest me," he said, flat and calm. Craig stared at him. "Where is she?" Kevin met his eyes. "She's in there. I hit her and chopped her up." The words seemed to drain the air from the room. Kevin started to shake, his breathing quick and ragged. Then he said, "I'm going to burn in hell." Jamie's body was taken to the medical examiner's office, where the autopsy began under cold fluorescent lights. Every bruise, cut, and mark told part of the story, one Kevin had already confessed to. There was deep bruising on the back of her head, lining up with Kevin's account of the wooden cutting board blows, and in her eyes, tiny red spots, called petechiae, revealed the terrifying pressure that had cut off her air. Along her cheeks there were faint curved marks, the shape and size consistent with a hand pressed over her face. But the worst injury couldn't be overlooked. A deep open wound across her neck, just like Kevin had described. The examiner also found damage to Jamie's area, including tearing so severe it left no question about the violence she had endured. But one question couldn't be answered: whether Jamie had still been alive or even conscious during those final moments. In the end, the official cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. Later, Kevin gave a full confession. He told investigators he had spent months planning the murder, driven by dark fantasies involving and even cannibalism. But he also claimed that when the moment came, he didn't eat any part of Jamie's body, because he felt disgusted with himself. He also said he chose Jamie simply because she was easy to get to. In 2008, Kevin went to trial, and from the very beginning, he never truly fought the evidence against him. He didn't outright admit to killing her, but he didn't deny it either. Even his own lawyer told the jury they would probably find him guilty and that the real goal was just to keep him off death row. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Jurors watched the FBI interview where Kevin, calm and almost matter-of-factly, confessed to everything he had done. They read the printed transcript. They heard how each step of the crime had played out, in his own words. When it came time to decide his sentence, the same jury had to ask whether there was any reason to spare him. Prosecutors pointed to two aggravating factors: that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and that Kevin would remain a continuing danger to society. In the end, the jury agreed on one. They ruled that what Kevin did to Jamie was so horrific that it met Oklahoma's especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel standard. They didn't find the continuing threat argument proven, but that didn't change the outcome. His defense team tried to humanize him. They brought in family, friends, and mental health experts to talk about Kevin's life, his struggles, and his mental state. But when the jury put it all on the scale, the horror of what he had done, against any reason to show mercy, they didn't flinch. It took just 23 minutes to find him guilty of first-degree murder, and when it came time for sentencing, their decision was unanimous. Every juror recommended death. And later, on April 3, 2008, the judge made it official. Kevin was sentenced to death. At his clemency hearing on December 13, 2024, Kevin didn't offer remorse or ask for forgiveness. Instead, he said he hoped for an afterlife where your every fantasy comes true. He told the board, "If you want to torture your childhood bully, you can." Then he added something even more unsettling. "Basically, my hope is that there's in heaven and I can indulge my every sexual fantasy." In their submission to the parole board, the Oklahoma Attorney General's office summed it up plainly. Truly, Underwood's crimes represent the worst of the worst of the worst. And then they backed it up. They said Jamie's murder wasn't impulsive. It was planned out over months, fueled by Kevin's obsession with violent fantasies. Prosecutors pointed to barbecue skewers he had purchased, allegedly with the intent to torture. They also showed a photo of a Barbie doll, head stuck with needles. And when asked why he had done it, Kevin simply replied, "Kind of illustrates what was in my fantasy." Jamie's sister, Lori Pate, addressed Kevin directly at the hearing. "You showed me at the age of 14 that monsters are not just something made up from storybooks," she wrote. "They wear our same clothing and walk on our same streets." She urged the board not to grant mercy. "You, Kevin Underwood, do not deserve clemency," she said. "We as a family deserve closure, that the monster who ended a precious life can no longer walk this earth and hurt others, but will suffer in the eternal fires." Kevin's lawyers argued otherwise. They said this wasn't about evil, but untreated mental illness. Before his trial, Kevin was diagnosed as having schizotypal personality disorder, and for his appeal he was re-diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, meaning that he is on the spectrum. His attorneys described years of abuse, social isolation, and an addiction to pornography. They didn't deny the horror, but they asked the board to consider that Kevin had no criminal record and that this was the act of someone deeply ill, not a Ted Bundy in the making. And in their letter to the board, they said, after a lifetime of abuse, Kevin realized he was slipping away, but he could not find himself help. Kevin ultimately cracked, and he decided to act on his worst fantasies, which were developed by spending the bulk of his life on the worst parts of the internet. But it didn't change anything. The board denied clemency in an unanimous 3-0 vote, and the execution date stayed in place, December 19, 2024, the day of Kevin's 45th birthday. That morning, he ate a big last meal. He requested a chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes with gravy, a cheeseburger, French fries, pinto beans, a hot roll, and a soda. But as his final moment approached, he broke down in tears. The decision to execute me on my birthday and 6 days before Christmas was a needlessly cruel thing to do to my family, he said. But I'm very sorry for what I did, and I wish I could take it back. The execution process began at 10:04 a.m. He turned his head and looked over at his legal team and family, including his mother. His breathing hitched just once, and then his eyes slowly shut. By 10:09, a doctor stepped into the chamber, shook his shoulder a few times, and confirmed he was unconscious. 5 minutes later, at 10:14 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Kevin Ray Underwood was 45 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.